Do-hyun Kim stood in his backyard on a sunny Saturday morning, holding a set of blueprints in his weathered hands. At 65 years old, he had finally found the perfect way to spend his retirement. The plans he held weren't for any ordinary deck. They were the result of 30 years of aerospace engineering experience and a secret he had kept for the past 5 years. His neighbor's cat, a fat orange tabby, watched from the fence as Do-hyun carefully measured and marked the ground with bright orange spray paint. The markings formed an unusual pattern, not the typical square or rectangle of most decks, but a complex series of interlocking hexagons that seemed to spiral outward from a central point. "Good morning, Mr. Kim," called a voice from next door. Do-hyun looked up to see Hae-Nul Park, the president of Maple Creek Homeowners Association, peering over the fence. Hae-Nul's perfectly pressed polo shirt and crisp khaki pants made him look more like he was heading to a country club than doing weekend yard work. "Good morning," Do-hyun replied politely, though he kept working. He knew Hae-Nul had been watching his every move since he'd submitted his building permit application to the city. "That's quite an unusual design you've got there," Hae-Nul said, his voice carrying a note of concern. "You know, the HOA has very specific guidelines about outdoor structures. Perhaps you'd like to review them before you start building." Do-hyun straightened up, his knees creaking slightly. "I've read all the guidelines, Mr. Park. My design meets every requirement for size, height, and setback from the property line. I even had an architect review it." Hae-Nul's smile tightened. "Well, there's also the matter of maintaining the neighborhood's traditional aesthetic standards. A hexagonal deck might not quite fit in." "The guidelines don't specify shape requirements for decks," Do-hyun said calmly. "I checked twice." Before Hae-Nul could respond, a large truck rumbled down the street and stopped in front of Do-hyun's house. The side of the vehicle read, "Song's Custom Materials." 2 workers began unloading large crates marked "Fragile" onto Do-hyun's driveway. Hae-Nul's eyes narrowed at the unusual shipment. These weren't the typical lumber and hardware store supplies he was used to seeing at construction sites. The crates had strange warning labels and what looked like scientific formulas printed on their sides. Do-hyun smiled to himself as he signed for the delivery. He had spent months perfecting the crystalline material inside those crates. To anyone else, it would look like decorative glass or high-end acrylic. Beautiful, but nothing special. Only he knew that each panel contained a complex network of microscopic channels designed to receive and transmit very specific wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. The next few weeks were busy ones in Do-hyun's backyard. He worked methodically, laying the foundation according to his precise calculations. Unlike typical deck posts that went straight down, his support structure branched out underground in a pattern that mirrored the hexagons above. Each connection point had to be exact, down to the millimeter. Neighbors walking by would often stop to watch him work. Do-hyun had hired help for the heavy lifting, but he personally handled the installation of each crystalline panel. He worked with the care and precision of a jeweler, checking and double-checking each connection, with strange-looking instruments from his old lab. The panels themselves caught everyone's attention. They seemed to change color depending on the angle of the light, shifting from clear to iridescent blues and purples. Some of the neighborhood children said it looked like someone had built a deck out of soap bubbles or fairy wings. Hae-Nul Park wasn't so enchanted. He spent more and more time in his yard, taking pictures and making notes. Every few days, he would find a new reason to remind Do-hyun about various HOA regulations. "Your construction materials need to be stored out of sight, Mr. Kim," he would say or remember. "Any exterior lighting needs to be approved by the architectural committee." Do-hyun always responded politely but firmly. He knew the rules, and he followed them exactly. What he didn't tell Hae-Nul was that he had designed this deck with far more important regulations in mind, ones that came from much further away than the Maple Creek HOA office. As the deck neared completion, strange things began happening in the neighborhood. People's cell phones would sometimes display odd characters. Satellite TV signals would briefly show unusual patterns. More than one neighbor reported seeing strange lights in the sky, though most blamed it on the nearby airport. Do-hyun's daughter Sun-hye visited one weekend, bringing his grandchildren. She worked in semiconductor manufacturing and had always been curious about her father's projects. As the kids played in the yard, she examined the deck's surface with professional interest. "Dad, this material, it's like nothing I've ever seen," she said, running her hand over a panel. "The crystal structure must be incredibly complex. How did you develop this?" Do-hyun just smiled. "Some old colleagues helped me work it out," he said vaguely. He couldn't tell her that those colleagues weren't from any Earth-based laboratory. That evening, as the sun set, the deck began to give off a soft, pulsing glow. The light was barely noticeable at first, just a gentle shimmer that could have been a reflection of the dying sunlight. But as darkness fell, the pattern became more distinct, waves of luminescence that seemed to flow through the crystalline panels in precise sequences. Hamnul Park stood at his kitchen window, watching with growing alarm. This was definitely not within HOA guidelines. Self-illuminating deck materials had never been approved by the Architectural Committee. He began drafting an official violation notice. But Do-hyun wasn't concerned about HOA notices. He sat in a chair on his glowing deck, sipping tea and watching the night sky. The deck's light patterns were confirmation that everything was working perfectly. Somewhere up there, the signals were being received. The next morning, Hae-nul arrived at Do-hyun's door with an official-looking envelope. "Mr. Kim, the HOA board has reviewed your deck construction and found several violations of our community standards," he announced, holding out the notice. Do-hyun took the envelope calmly. "What violations exactly?" "First, the use of non-traditional building materials without approval. Second, the installation of unauthorized lighting features. Third, the unusual structural design that doesn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. And fourth, the potential safety hazard posed by your, whatever that material is." "I see," Do-hyun said quietly. "And what action are you proposing?" Hae-nul straightened his shoulders. "The board is requiring you to remove the deck and replace it with an approved design using standard materials. You have 30 days to comply, or will be forced to take legal action." Do-hyun looked at the notice, then back at Hae-nul. "I'm afraid I can't do that. This deck serves a very specific purpose, and it must remain as it is." "A specific purpose?" Hae-nul scoffed. "It's a deck, Mr. Kim, for sitting outside and having barbecues, not some kind of science experiment." If only you knew, Do-hyun thought. The deck wasn't just for sending signals. It was part of a larger network, carefully positioned around the globe. Each installation looked different, blending into its surroundings, but they all served the same purpose. Humanity wasn't ready for the full truth yet, but they would be soon. "I'll have my lawyer review this notice," Do-hyun said finally. "Good day, Mr. Park." As Hae-nul walked away, Do-hyun went back to his deck. The morning sun was hitting the panels at just the right angle, sending rainbow reflections dancing across the yard. He took out his phone and sent a message to a special contact, listed only as advisory team. The response came quickly. "Installation confirmed functional. Maintain position. Timeline proceeding as planned." Do-hyun smiled and put his phone away. Let the HOA try their legal action. By the time this went to court, everything would be different. He just had to keep the deck intact for a few more weeks. In his house next door, Hae-nul Park was already making calls to the HOA's lawyers. He was determined to maintain the traditional standards of Maple Creek, no matter what it took. That weird, glowing deck had to go, and he would make sure of it. Neither man knew that their simple property dispute was about to become much more than a neighborhood matter. High above them, something was responding to the deck's signals, and Earth's first official contact with galactic civilization would begin in the last place anyone expected: a suburban backyard in Maple Creek. The morning of the demolition arrived with heavy gray clouds hanging over Maple Creek. Do-hyun Kim was away at what he had told his neighbors was an engineering conference in Seoul. In reality, he was meeting with others like himself, people who had been chosen to help prepare Earth for its coming introduction to the galactic community. Hanul Park stood in his driveway at exactly 7:00 a.m., watching with satisfaction as the demolition crew pulled up in their trucks. He had waited until Do-hyun was out of the country to schedule this. The court had granted a temporary order allowing the HOA to remove the deck, pending a final hearing. Hanul wasn't going to waste any time. "Remember," he told the crew chief, "everything needs to be completely removed, including the foundation. We want no trace of this eyesore left." The crew chief, a man named Tae-yang, nodded uncertainly. He had been in the construction business for 20 years, but something about this job made him uncomfortable. The deck didn't look unsafe. In fact, it was the most carefully built structure he had ever seen. As the workers began setting up their equipment, something strange happened. All their phones suddenly lost signal at the same time. The radio in their truck started picking up odd frequencies, broadcasting what sounded like musical tones in no pattern anyone recognized. "Must be interference from the power lines," Tae-yang said, though he didn't quite believe it. He had worked near power lines plenty of times, and it had never caused anything like this. The crew started with the outer panels of the deck. The moment the first crystalline panel was disconnected, a high-pitched tone filled the air. It wasn't loud enough to hurt, but it made everyone's teeth feel strange, like biting on aluminum foil. In her laboratory 30 miles away, Dr. Myra Lee stared at her computer screen in alarm. She had been tracking unusual energy signatures for the past few months as part of her work at the National Science Institute. Now her instruments were showing massive spikes coming from the Maple Creek area. "This can't be right," she muttered, checking her equipment. The energy pattern matched exactly what her team had detected coming from deep space 6 months ago. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Back at Do-hyun's house, the demolition continued. Each panel they removed caused more strange effects. Compass needles in the workers' phones spun wildly. Car alarms up and down the street started going off for no reason. Birds gathered on nearby roofs, watching the work with unusual interest. Hanul ignored all these warning signs. He was too focused on his victory, taking pictures to document the removal of what he saw as a threat to property values. He didn't notice that his expensive digital camera was capturing images of things that weren't visible to the naked eye, strange shadows and lights that seemed to hover around the deck. By mid-morning, half the deck was gone. The workers had filled a dumpster with the crystalline panels, which made soft ringing sounds whenever they touched each other. Tae-yang noticed that the pieces seemed to be growing warmer, even though the day was cool. "Mr. Park," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "maybe we should take a break. Something doesn't feel right about this." "Nonsense," Hanul replied sharply. "The sooner this is done, the better. Keep working." At that moment, Dr. Myra Lee was racing toward Maple Creek in her government car, breaking several speed limits. Her latest readings showed that the energy levels were reaching critical points. Whatever was causing these signatures, it wasn't meant to be dismantled this way. The workers reached the central section of the deck, where all the hexagonal patterns seemed to flow together. As they prepared to remove the core panel, the sky above them suddenly darkened. Everyone looked up, expecting to see storm clouds, but the darkness was different, more like a shadow passing over the sun. The core panel was stuck firmly in place. 2 workers had to use pry bars to loosen it. When it finally came free, a pulse of energy rippled through the ground. Every electronic device within a mile radius turned off and on again. The birds that had been watching flew away all at once, their wings making a sound like thunder. "Keep going," Hanul ordered, though his voice shook slightly. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. Dr. Myra arrived just as the workers were removing the last of the support structure. She jumped out of her car, waving her government ID. "Stop. You have to stop right now." But it was too late. The final piece came loose, and for a moment, everything went completely silent. Then, high above the earth, something noticed that an important signal had just gone dark. The rest of the day was chaos. The demolition crew packed up quickly, spooked by the strange events. Newell retreated to his house, telling himself that everything would be back to normal once that weird deck was gone. Dr. Myre stayed at the site, taking readings and making urgent phone calls to her superiors. As evening fell, Do-hyun's neighbor on the other side, an elderly woman named Sunak, saw something that would soon become international news. Looking out her kitchen window, she noticed what looked like stars moving in formation, making patterns that matched the ones Do-hyun's deck used to create with its lights. In his hotel room in Seoul, Do-hyun received an alert on his special communicator. The message was simple but alarming. Signal lost. Network compromised. Protocol 7 initiated. He immediately began booking a flight home, knowing he would arrive too late to stop the demolition, but hopefully in time to handle what came next. The deck wasn't just a deck. It was a vital communication node in a network that spread across the globe. Each node had been carefully placed and disguised, waiting for the right moment to activate fully. Now that moment would have to come sooner than planned. The demolition of his deck had sent emergency signals through the entire network. The carefully planned first contact scenario they had spent years preparing would have to be scrapped. Newell Park spent that evening writing up a report for the HOA board, documenting the successful removal of the non-compliant structure. He was so focused on proper procedures and paperwork that he didn't notice the strange lights that had begun to appear in the sky, or the way his computer kept showing odd symbols between words. Dr. Myre worked through the night, coordinating with other scientists around the world who were all seeing the same readings. The energy signatures were growing stronger, and they were coming from above now, not from the ground. By midnight, satellite TV channels across the country began picking up unusual interference. People's streaming services started showing strange patterns between shows. Radio stations picked up what seemed like music, but unlike anything ever heard on Earth. The demolition crew had filled 3 dumpsters with the remains of Do-hyun's deck. The crystalline panels, even broken, continued to give off a faint glow. Tai-yang, driving home late, could have sworn he saw the pieces trying to pull themselves back together. In her lab, Dr. Myre finally decoded part of the energy pattern. What she found made her sit down hard in her chair. The pattern wasn't random interference. It was a message, repeating over and over. Connection lost. Initiating direct contact protocol. Prepare for arrival. The night grew deeper, but few people in Maple Creek slept. There was a feeling in the air, a tension like the moment before a thunderstorm. But this storm would not bring rain. Instead, it would bring visitors who had been waiting a very long time for humans to be ready to meet them. Newell Park lay awake in his bed, unable to shake the feeling that his victory over Do-hyun's deck would turn out to be the biggest mistake of his life. He had no idea just how right he was, or that by morning, his HOA rules would be the least of anyone's concerns. The broken pieces of the deck lay in their dumpsters, still faintly glowing, still trying to send their signals to the stars. And somewhere up there, something was responding, preparing to make an entrance that would change everything. All because a homeowners association president couldn't stand an unusual deck in his neighborhood. The sky above Maple Creek turned strange at exactly 9:47 p.m. The stars began to move in ways that stars should not move. People came out of their homes, standing in their driveways and front yards, heads tilted back to watch the impossible show above them. Newell Park stood on his perfectly maintained lawn, his HOA rulebook forgotten in his trembling hands. The lights in the sky were forming patterns, the same hexagonal patterns that had been built into Do-hyun's now destroyed deck. Dr. Myre Lee had set up temporary monitoring equipment in Do-hyun's backyard. Her instruments were recording energy readings that made no sense according to known physics. The broken pieces of the deck in the dumpsters had started humming, giving off a blue glow that grew stronger with each passing minute. "This is beyond anything we expected," she said into her phone. speaking to her superiors at the National Science Institute. The energy signatures match what we detected from deep space, but they're thousands of times stronger now. Something is coming. High above the Earth, the air itself seemed to bend and twist. A circle of darkness appeared, like a hole cut in the night sky. Through this hole came a sight that would soon appear on every news channel in the world. A massive ship, its surface made of the same crystalline material as Du Hyun's deck. The ship was beautiful in a way that made people's eyes hurt. It seemed to change shape as it moved, flowing like liquid metal, but sparkling like diamonds. As it descended toward Maple Creek, smaller vessels emerged from its sides, surrounding it like escorts. Hae-Newell's phone rang. It was the HOA board's lawyer. "Mr. Park," the lawyer said, his voice shaking, "I think we may have made a serious error in judgment about Mr. Kim's deck." Before Hae-Newell could respond, every electronic device in Maple Creek suddenly turned on at once. TVs, phones, computers, even car radios, all showing the same message in glowing blue letters. "Greetings, Earth. We come in peace, though you have damaged our primary communication node. Please remain calm." Do Hyun's plane was still 2 hours from landing when the ship appeared. He watched the news coverage on the seatback screen, knowing that years of careful planning had just been thrown out the window. The slow, careful introduction to galactic society they had planned would now have to happen all at once. Back in Maple Creek, the main ship had positioned itself directly above Do Hyun's property. It hung in the air like a second moon, its surface rippling with patterns of light that matched the broken deck pieces below. Smaller ships circled the neighborhood, their presence keeping chaos at bay despite the growing crowd of onlookers. Military helicopters appeared on the horizon, but they kept their distance. Someone in the government chain of command had received the right messages and understood that this was not a threat to be countered, but a meeting that had been long arranged. A beam of light shot down from the main ship, touching the ground exactly where Do Hyun's deck had stood. Within this beam, figures began to appear. They were tall, their bodies seeming to shift and change like the surface of their ship. They wore no spacesuits or protective gear. Instead, their forms simply adjusted to Earth's atmosphere. Dr. Myray stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. The aliens turned toward her, and she gasped. Their faces were beautiful in a mathematical way, like perfect geometric patterns given life. "We are the Guardians," they said, their words appearing in glowing text in the air rather than being spoken. "We have been watching and waiting, helping prepare your species for this meeting. Do Hyun Kim is one of our many contacts on Earth, chosen to help build the communication network that would ease your world into awareness of galactic society." Hae-Newell Park had backed up against his house, his face pale. The aliens turned to look at him, their geometric features rearranging into what might have been expressions of disappointment. "You have caused a significant diplomatic incident," their floating text informed him. "The network node you destroyed was not merely a deck. It was a crucial part of the largest technological project ever undertaken on Earth, the creation of a planetary communication system that would allow your world to join the galactic community smoothly and safely." Police cars had formed a perimeter around the neighborhood, keeping back the growing crowd of spectators. News helicopters circled at a safe distance, their cameras capturing footage that would soon be seen by billions. One of the aliens moved toward the dumpsters containing the remains of Do Hyun's deck. With a gesture, they lifted the broken pieces into the air. The fragments began to glow brighter, drawing together like magnets, reconstructing themselves. "The damage can be repaired," the alien's text explained, "but the timing cannot. Your world must now face a truth it was meant to learn gradually, over many years. The shock to your societies will be significant." More ships were appearing in the sky now, their arrival visible to half the planet. The carefully planned first contact scenario, meant to unfold over decades, had been compressed into a single night because one HOA president couldn't tolerate an unusual deck. Dr. Myray's instruments were recording everything, though she knew this would change our understanding of physics forever. The aliens' technology seemed to ignore many of what humans had thought were universal laws of nature. A smaller alien vessel descended, landing gently in Do-hyun's backyard. Its surface rippled, and a door appeared. Out stepped Do-hyun himself, having been picked up directly from his plane by the aliens once they realized their timeline had to change. He walked calmly through his yard, nodding to Dr. Myray, and pointedly ignoring Hae-Nul. The aliens greeted him with geometric patterns that suggested respect and friendship. "I apologize for the rushed nature of this meeting," Do-hyun said to the gathered crowd, his voice steady. "We had hoped to introduce Earth to the galactic community slowly, allowing time for adjustment. But now," he looked at Hae-Nul, "now we'll have to do things the hard way." The alien's text appeared again. Do-hyun Kim and others like him have been helping us understand human society, preparing the way for this meeting. The communication nodes, disguised as ordinary structures, were meant to gradually attune your world to our presence. Each was carefully placed and designed to blend into its surroundings while performing its vital function. Hae-Nul finally found his voice. But the HOA guidelines clearly state. He was cut off by a sound like crystal bells ringing. The aliens were laughing, their geometric forms shimmering with amusement. "Your local property guidelines," their text read, "have just interfered with a project planned by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. This will be remembered as a significant moment in Earth's history, though perhaps not in the way you intended." The night grew deeper, but nobody in Maple Creek thought of sleep. The aliens continued their work, repairing the deck and expanding it into something far more complex and beautiful. Their ships hung in the sky like new constellations, visible to everyone, ending forever the idea that humanity was alone in the universe. And Hae-Nul Park, still clutching his HOA rulebook, watched as his perfectly ordinary neighborhood became the center of humanity's first official contact with alien life. All because he couldn't tolerate a deck that didn't match his idea of proper suburban aesthetics. 3 weeks after the aliens arrived, the courthouse was packed. People had come from all over the country to watch what newspapers were calling the deck trial of the century. Do-hyun Kim sat calmly at one table with his lawyer. At the other table, Hae-Nul Park and the Maple Creek HOA board looked much less comfortable. The judge, a serious woman named Han Jae-yang, had been chosen specifically for this case because of her reputation for fairness and her background in both property law and international relations. Today, she would be setting legal precedent not just for Earth, but for humanity's place in the galactic community. "This court will come to order," Judge Yang announced. The room fell silent except for the soft hum coming from the crystalline translator devices the aliens had provided to ensure perfect communication during the trial. In the gallery, 3 alien representatives sat watching. Their geometric forms shifted gently, creating patterns that the translators said showed great interest in human legal processes. Dr. Myra Lee sat near them, still taking readings with her instruments even after 3 weeks of study. The trial began with Do-hyun's lawyer presenting the case. "Your Honor," she said, "my client followed every building code and HOA regulation in constructing his deck. The HOA's decision to destroy it was not only unauthorized, but has caused unprecedented diplomatic complications." Hae-Nul's lawyer tried to defend his client's actions. The HOA was simply trying to maintain community standards, he argued. How were they supposed to know the deck was actually alien technology? One of the aliens shifted, creating a pattern that the translator displayed as mild amusement. The deck hadn't been alien technology. It had been human technology, created on Earth using principles taught by the aliens. This distinction would prove important. Do-hyun took the stand first. For the first time, he publicly explained how he had been chosen 15 years ago to help prepare Earth for contact with galactic civilization. The aliens had found him through his work in aerospace engineering, recognizing his unique combination of technical skill and open-mindedness. The deck was part of a network, he explained to the court. Each node looked different, suited to its location. In Singapore, one was disguised as a rooftop garden. In Cairo, it was part of a solar power installation. Here at Maple Creek, a deck made perfect sense, or it would have, if the HOA hadn't interfered. Hainul shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Do-hyun continued. The network was designed to slowly attune Earth's population to the presence of advanced technology. It would have taken 20 more years of gentle preparation before the aliens revealed themselves. Instead, the HOA's actions forced an emergency first contact. The next witness was Dr. Myra Lee, who presented her scientific findings. The technology in Mr. Kim's deck was revolutionary, but carefully designed to be safe. The HOA's crude demolition could have caused serious problems. We're lucky the aliens were monitoring and could respond quickly. As she testified, screens around the courtroom showed readings from the day of the demolition. The energy spikes were clear, as was the desperate signal the broken deck had sent into space. Hainul Park testified last. Under questioning, he had to admit that Do-hyun's deck had violated no specific HOA rules. He had acted based on his own interpretation of neighborhood aesthetic standards, a phrase that now seemed remarkably small compared to the importance of galactic diplomacy. Did you try to understand why Mr. Kim's deck was different? Do-hyun's lawyer asked him. No, Hainul admitted. I just knew it didn't look like other decks. And did you consider that different might sometimes mean better? Hainul looked down at his hands. No, he said quietly. I just wanted everything to stay the same. Judge Yang took 2 days to consider her verdict. When the court reconvened, the room was even more crowded than before. The case had captured global attention, symbolizing humanity's struggle between clinging to the familiar and embracing a new, wider universe. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Do-hyun Kim, Judge Yang announced. The Maple Creek HOA acted without proper authority and with reckless disregard for property rights. They are ordered to pay damages in the amount of $5 million to be used for the reconstruction and expansion of the communication node. But she wasn't finished. More importantly, this court is establishing new precedent regarding the integration of advanced technology into human communities. No homeowners association or similar body may interfere with properly authorized installations related to Earth's integration into the galactic community. The aliens' geometric patterns showed strong approval. Their translator displayed, "This is wisdom. Progress cannot be stopped by those who fear change." Judge Yang continued, "Furthermore, Mr. Park and the current HOA board are to be removed from their positions immediately. The court recommends that future HOA officials receive training in recognizing and protecting innovative technologies." The aftermath of the trial brought big changes to Maple Creek. Do-hyun's new deck, rebuilt with alien help, was far grander than the original. It served as both a communication node and Earth's first official galactic embassy. Diplomatic meetings were held there, with representatives from dozens of alien civilizations discussing Earth's gradual integration into the galactic community. Hainul Park moved away shortly after the trial, unable to face his neighbors after his mistake had made their suburb famous across the galaxy. His replacement as HOA president was, ironically, Dr. Myra Lee, who established new guidelines that encouraged innovation while still maintaining reasonable community standards. The alien ships became a common sight in the sky above Maple Creek. Children played in yards while crystalline vessels floated overhead like artistic clouds. Property values in the neighborhood skyrocketed, though not for the reasons the HOA had always worried about. 1 year after the trial, Do-hyun hosted a neighborhood barbecue on his deck. Humans mingled with aliens, sharing food and stories. The geometric beings had learned to create temporary human-like forms for such social occasions, though they still communicated through floating text. "Your species adapts well to change," one alien told Do-hyun as they watched the party. "Even those who initially resist can learn to embrace the new." Do-hyun nodded, watching as several former HOA board members chatted comfortably with a group of shimmering geometric beings about the best ways to maintain crystalline surfaces in Earth's atmosphere. "That's why you chose Earth, isn't it?" he asked. "Not because we were ready, but because we could learn to be ready." The alien's form sparkled in what Du Hyun had learned was their version of a smile. "Exactly. Though we didn't expect the learning to be quite so dramatic." Above them, the stars twinkled, no longer distant and mysterious, but full of known worlds and new friends. And if some of those stars moved in unusual patterns, well, that was just normal now in Maple Creek, the suburb where a simple deck had changed the course of human history.